The land still looked white from a distance. From the ridge above the valley, snow covered most of the ground in uneven sheets, broken only by dark rock, exposed grass, and thin lines of water where melting had already begun. The air was cold, but no longer sharp. It carried moisture now, a faint smell of wet stone and earth that had been sealed away for months. The melt line ran across the slope like a boundary that had not existed before. Above it, the snow was firm and pale, reflecting light, offering continuity. Below it, the ground was changing, patches of brown and grey emerging, surfaces uneven and unfamiliar. What had once been cover was thinning, retreating upward day by day. The ptarmigan stood just above that line. Its plumage was still mostly white, thick and dense from winter, broken only by small patches of darker feathers beginning to show through. Against the snow, it blended almost completely. Against the exposed ground below, it would not. The bird remained still. Movement was costly now. The season between winter and summer was the most dangerous. Snow no longer meant safety, but neither did the land beneath it. Tracks were easier to see. Contrast worked against survival. The ptarmigan lowered its head and pecked once at the surface of the snow, testing. Beneath the thin crust, the snow gave way quickly, collapsing into wet granules. Water seeped through, darkening the bird's feet. It stepped forward carefully. The melt line was not a physical barrier, but it felt like one. One foot crossed it, then the other. The ptarmigan moved onto ground that no longer offered uniform colour or texture. Small stones pressed against its toes. A strip of exposed moss bent slightly under its weight. The snow behind it remained bright. Ahead, there was no cover. From a distance, the bird now stood out. Not sharply, but enough. White against brown. Stillness helped, but it did not erase contrast. The ptarmigan paused again, body low, neck pulled slightly in, minimizing its shape. Above, the sky was overcast, light diffused and flat. Shadows were weak. That helped, but only partially. Farther down the valley, a human figure moved slowly along a marked trail. Her name was Anna Keller, and she was part of a seasonal research team documenting snowmelt patterns and ground exposure. She carried a pack and walked with measured steps, careful not to slip on wet stone. Her attention was on the land, not the bird. She stopped and knelt near a small stream forming where snow had melted back from the rocks. She took notes, measured water temperature, and marked the melt line on her map. It was earlier than expected this year. Anna stood and scanned the slope briefly, not looking for animals, just orienting herself. The ptarmigan did not move. To her eyes, it was nothing more than an irregular patch of light. The wind shifted slightly. The bird adjusted its stance, feathers lifting just enough to release trapped moisture. It did not retreat back into the snow. The exposed ground held food, buds, seeds, insects beginning to stir. Hunger outweighed visibility. The ptarmigan crossed fully into the melt zone and began to feed in short, efficient motions, pausing often, head raised, listening. The snow above the line remained intact. Below it, the land offered no cover. And for the first time since winter began to loosen its grip, the ptarmigan stood where camouflage no longer worked the way it had before. The change in colour was subtle, but it mattered. Above the melt line, the snow still reflected light evenly, smoothing the landscape into something continuous and predictable. Below it, the ground broke into irregular patches, dark soil, exposed rock, wet moss, and thin vegetation pressed flat by months of snow cover. Nothing matched the ptarmigan's white plumage anymore. The bird moved carefully. Each step was placed with intention, not because the ground was difficult, but because stopping often reduced attention. Motion attracted eyes. Stillness could delay recognition. The ptarmigan pecked at a cluster of emerging shoots, stripping away thin layers of plant matter with quick, efficient movements. Food was scarce but improving. Winter had forced restraint. Now restraint came from risk. A shadow passed briefly over the slope. The ptarmigan froze. It lowered its body slightly, wings tucked tight, neck shortened. Its eyes tracked the sky without lifting its head. The shadow belonged to a passing cloud, not a predator, but the response had already happened. Instinct did not wait for confirmation. Above, the cloud drifted on. The bird remained motionless for several long seconds before resuming its slow advance downslope. Farther along the ridge, tracks crossed the melt line at an angle. Fox tracks, shallow and narrow, their edges softening as meltwater ran through them. The ptarmigan did not recognize them as symbols, but it sensed disturbance. The ground there carried a different message. It shifted direction slightly, staying closer to scattered stones that could break its outline. At the edge of a shallow depression, the ptarmigan stopped again. Wind moved across the slope, carrying scent upward. The bird turned into it, facing potential threat rather than leaving it at its back. The exposed ground no longer dampened sound the way snow had. Each small movement produced faint noise. From a higher point along the trail, Anna Keller paused. She adjusted the strap of her pack and scanned the valley, orienting herself again. Her work required patience, but it also required awareness of footing, weather, and time. She raised her binoculars briefly, not to search for animals, but to read the slope and identify where snow still held firm. Through the lenses, the ptarmigan appeared suddenly, unexpectedly. Anna lowered the binoculars and raised them again, slower this time. She focused deliberately. "There," she said quietly. She did not move closer. She knew enough not to. Animals at this time of year were already managing narrow margins. Observation was enough. She watched as the bird fed, paused, and fed again. She noticed the contrast, the way the white body stood out against the darkening land. "Still in winter plumage," she murmured. She made no notes. This was not her assignment. Still, she watched for several minutes, committing the scene to memory. The ptarmigan shifted direction, moving slightly uphill now, testing the edge between snow and ground again. One foot stepped back into snow. The difference was immediate. The cold surface firmed beneath it. The bird's outline softened. It lingered there, half in, half out. Then it stepped back into the melt zone. Food was here. The snow above the line no longer offered enough. A distant sound carried across the valley, the faint bark of a fox, not close, but not far enough to ignore. The ptarmigan stopped feeding and crouched low, feathers compressed, body flattened against uneven ground. The bark came again, then silence. Minutes passed. The ptarmigan remained still until the tension eased slightly, then resumed movement, this time angling toward a patch of broken rock where shadows gathered longer. The melt line remained where it was. The snow continued to retreat, inch by inch. And in the space where white no longer meant safety, the ptarmigan learned that survival now depended on timing, restraint, and the careful choice of every step. The fox did not appear immediately. It rarely did. Predators in this landscape moved with patience, shaped by long seasons where wasted energy meant failure. The sound the ptarmigan had heard earlier lingered in the air, not as noise but as possibility. The valley had gone quiet again, but quiet did not mean safe. The ptarmigan remained near the broken rocks, feeding sparingly. It pecked once, twice, then stopped. Its head lifted slightly, eyes scanning not for shapes but for movement, something out of rhythm with wind or melting water. The exposed ground forced vigilance. There was no single surface now, no uniform background to disappear into. A thin stream ran nearby, newly formed, water cutting a narrow path through dark soil. Meltwater moved slowly, carrying silt, reshaping the slope in small, temporary ways. The ptarmigan stepped across it carefully, lifting its feet higher than usual to avoid wetting its feathers more than necessary. Wet feathers meant weight. Weight meant slower flight. Above the slope, the fox moved. Its coat was mottled. Winter fur thinning, patches of red-brown visible beneath the pale outer layer. It followed the melt line loosely, nose low, not tracking a single animal, but reading the ground as a whole. Scents overlapped here: bird, water, stone, old snow. The fox paused where the tracks crossed earlier. It stood still, ears forward, listening. The ptarmigan was downwind now. That helped the bird, but not completely. The fox did not rush. It angled downward, keeping elevation advantage, using rocks and uneven ground to break its outline. The ptarmigan sensed pressure before it saw anything. Its body stiffened slightly. Feeding stopped. It crouched lower, feathers compressed again, minimizing shape. Stillness returned, but this time it was deliberate, sustained. From the trail above, Anna Keller had stopped again. She had noticed the shift in behavior before she understood the cause. The bird had gone quiet, posture changed, movements halted. Anna scanned the slope slowly, widening her field of view. She spotted the fox seconds later. It was far enough away that she doubted the ptarmigan could see it clearly, but distance did not mean safety. She stayed where she was. Intervening was neither possible nor appropriate. She watched. The fox moved another few steps, then stopped. It tested the air, then the ground. It was cautious, not hungry enough to gamble, not desperate enough to sprint. The ptarmigan waited. Seconds stretched. Meltwater continued to run. Wind shifted again, briefly reversing direction. That was enough. The fox lifted its head sharply, scent confirmed. Its posture changed, weight forward, muscles engaged. The ptarmigan reacted instantly. It did not run. It launched. Wings beat hard, louder than they would have been against snow. The bird lifted low, fast, angling uphill toward remaining patches of white. The effort was heavy, feathers damp, air dense. The fox lunged but did not pursue fully. The angle was wrong. The distance too great. It stopped after a short burst, watching the bird gain elevation. The ptarmigan landed just above the melt line, feet sinking slightly into softer snow. It continued moving, wings half open, then folded them tightly once balance returned. Against the snow, it blended again. Not perfectly, but better. The fox turned away after a moment, scanning the slope once more before moving on, following another scent trail toward the valley floor. Anna exhaled slowly, realizing she had been holding her breath. She did not write anything down. There was nothing to record that would fit into a chart or table. She shouldered her pack and continued along the trail, careful with her footing, leaving the animals to their decisions. Above the melt line, the ptarmigan stood still. Below it, the ground continued to darken as the day warmed. Snow thinned further, retreating unevenly, leaving fewer places where white meant safety. The bird preened briefly, smoothing feathers, removing moisture where it could. It would need to return below again. Food would not come to the snow, but not yet. For now, distance had widened again. The melt line held, and the space between danger and survival remained narrow, shifting, never fixed for long. The melt did not stop. It never did once it began. Each day the line shifted slightly upward, sometimes by only a few steps, sometimes by entire stretches of slope after a warm night. Snow thinned from below first, losing its firmness, turning grainy, then collapsing into uneven patches that no longer held shape or colour. The ptarmigan felt the change before it could be measured. Snow that once supported weight now broke underfoot. The clean surface that had softened outlines now reflected less light, its edges dirty with soil and plant matter carried up from below. What remained was no longer reliable cover. The bird moved earlier in the day now. Morning still offered colder ground, firmer snow, and reduced scent travel. The ptarmigan followed a narrower band along the slope, staying close to scattered rocks and low ridges that cast weak but useful shadows. Feeding became shorter, more frequent. It pecked quickly, lifted its head, paused. Each movement was controlled. Energy was spent cautiously. Flight was avoided unless necessary. Wet feathers dried slowly in the cool air. Below the melt line, the land was alive in new ways. Insects stirred, buds opened, thin grasses straightened after months pressed flat. Food was easier to find there, but danger was constant. Contrast worked against the bird at every angle. The ptarmigan crossed the melt line again late one morning, choosing a section where snow lingered in broken strips rather than vanishing completely. It moved between surfaces, snow to stone, stone to moss, moss to ground, never staying long in one place. A raven passed overhead, its shadow stretching briefly across the slope. The ptarmigan froze instantly. Ravens were not predators in the same way as foxes, but they were observers. Where they lingered, others sometimes followed. The bird remained motionless until the shadow passed and did not return. From the trail, Anna Keller stopped again. She had marked the melt line twice already that week. Each time it was higher. She knelt near a patch of exposed ground where water ran beneath thinning snow and pressed her gloved hand into the soil. It was soft near the surface, firm below. The transition layer was shallow. She looked upslope and saw the ptarmigan again. This time it was farther from the snow than before. Anna watched quietly, noting the behavior rather than the bird itself, the pauses, the scanning, the way movement stopped whenever the environment shifted. She understood enough ecology to recognize constraint. She adjusted her pack and moved on. The ptarmigan continued feeding until a breeze changed direction. Scent traveled differently now. The ground held warmth. Air moved unevenly along the slope, lifting and dropping without pattern. The bird shifted position, staying downwind of open ground as much as possible. By afternoon, the temperature rose again. Snow softened further. The ptarmigan retreated upslope, not to safety, but to familiarity. It rested near a rock outcrop where snow still held longer, body angled away from the wind, feathers fluffed just enough to regulate heat. Rest was not sleep, it was readiness. The melt line crept upward as the day went on. There would be less snow tomorrow, fewer places to disappear, more time spent choosing, weighing, waiting. The season had changed, but not gently, and the ptarmigan remained balanced between what was leaving and what had not yet arrived, moving carefully in a landscape where cover could no longer be assumed.